All right. Morning, everybody. Thank you. I don't know if I'm going to entirely speak from, is the microphone on, but we are recording, and so also want to make sure that we're capturing this. So thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for the introduction. It's great to be here. I've had a chance to work with parts of the South Carolina team on some other ESEA work, but it's great to be here in person. We did that virtually, so it's lovely to be here in person. And we're going to dig into Title I Part D. And today's, let me start off by just telling you a little bit about myself and where I come from. So I have more than 30 years of experience in education, which includes 18 years as a classroom teacher. That was all in California, in Oakland, California. I then moved to Wisconsin, where I worked at the Department of Public Instruction on the Title I team, and was the director of the Title I team there for over 8 years. And so that included Title I Part A, Title I Part C, Title I Part D. McKinney-Vento also led that, and there's intersections, as I'm sure you know, in many of those programs. Actually, got a couple slides for who you are, but I didn't put this one in, but many of you, I saw the titles on some of the signed up federal programs. Raise your hand if you are responsible for more than just Title I Part D. So if you have Title I Part D plus, yeah, looking around the room, that's in many cases. It is rare the districts where Title I Part D is its own, and so very much sensitive to that. And while this training is going to focus on Title I Part D, there's hopefully you'll also find connections and relevancy in all of those, especially you know, in terms of things like allowable costs. And we're going to talk both about specific allowable costs for Title I Part D, but then also some conceptual ideas that cross programs. And I think that hope that it'll be relevant for you. I was also in Wisconsin the ESEA coordinator, so also worked with other ESEA titles, Title II, Title III, Title IV, both Part A and Part B, 21st Century Learning Communities. And then, as many of us, both at the state level and in the district level, when COVID relief packages came through, was assigned that because there wasn't an existing position, or the federal programs kind of just got assigned that. So also led all of the stimulus funds, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3 year in Wisconsin, and also was a member and president of the National Association of ESEA State Program Administrators, where I worked with Jewel for a couple of years, and so we had a chance to get to know each other in that capacity. Jewel kind of already previewed this a little bit, but how many years with Title I Part D? So I'm just from kind of a show of hands to kind of get a range of who's in the room. Who's been working with, is there anyone in the room who's been working with Title I Part D for less than a year? It's okay. You're in the right place. If you are, okay, so less than a year. How about the 1 to 3 year range, if you're in that range? Okay, 3 to 5 years. Some 3 to 5, 5 to 10. 5 to 10 range, some in that, and any 10 plus years of Title I Part D. Okay, so a range there, 10 plus gets us into No Child Left Behind and other iterations. We're going to talk some about different iterations of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and a little bit of the history of it, because I think it's important to know a little bit about the history to understand the here and now. One of the essential parts of all ESEA titles is focusing on the purpose of the title. What is this about? So we're going to spend some time this morning talking about the purpose of Title I Part D. It makes a difference both for programming. Also, it's actually at the root of allowable costs, in that when Congress passes the law, they want you to spend the money that they've allocated for this to carry out the purpose of the law. So we're going to spend some time talking about the purpose of Title I Part D. But before we do so, I just, as a way to get to know us, want to ask you, what is your purpose for working in a Title I Part D program? And this is a Menti, and sorry, I tried to get a QR code, but I was unsuccessful. So if you go to menti.com, either on your phone or your laptop, and then you enter the code, so you can see it there at the top, 22819352. It gives you an opportunity to put in 1, 2, or 3 responses for what your purpose is, and those will populate on the screen once you hit submit. What is your purpose for working in a Title I Part D program? Give folks a minute to do that. You can see as you hit submit, it'll pop up on the screen. With the word clouds, the more time a word is used, the larger it gets on the screen. Probably familiar with that. I did not game the system. I don't know if there's a way to do it, although I'd look into that, but can't tell you how much I appreciate that support students is at the center of this word cloud, and it gives, I know that I'm in the right place and that we're all in the right place if we have supporting students, and all of the other components of this are critical as well, but supporting students being as the centerpiece for what we're doing, and we'll kind of go through this, but that is definitely the core of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act writ large of Title I as a title and of Title I Part D. So deeply appreciate that. I'm going to take us back here. Slideshow. Thank you, Eric. And then from current slide, right? Yep. That one there. Okay, got it back. All right, so what are we doing today? The objectives training will provide a fun foundational understanding of Title I Part D. So we'll talk a little bit about the statutes, the regulations and guidance, the fiscal rules and the programming. I really do believe that those things go together. And so we'll work on those collaboratively, not separately, but part of a comprehensive program. And at the end of the 2 days, hopefully you'll both have a foundational understanding, and actually you'll also have some practical tools. And I'm going to go to the workday. Hopefully you've seen the agenda in the registration materials, but you'll see that it is a combination of some information that I'm going to be sharing with you and some work time. When you came in, you might have seen it, and I have other slides where you're going to we have some key resources and documents, but there's going to be an opportunity for you to work with your materials in your program. So coming out of these 2 days, not just gaining information, but be able to take some practical knowledge with you and some of your planning for the year, getting you ready for the year. I know we're already, the year has already started, but really laying out your year and your program of Title I Part D. And again, hopefully some of these pieces might carry over into other title programs that you work with. You can also see on here in the room, there's Title I Part D, Subpart 1 and Subpart 2, and we have a combination of some portions of this that will be together and some parts that will be separate. And again, you can see on the agenda how there's some parts that are going to be information sharing and then activities. And so we'll be splitting up a little bit. I'll be working with Subpart 1 and Subpart 2 separately, and you'll have some work time. And in that time, you can work at your tables. You can also move around the room, as Jules said, different people with different experiences, and you might want to calibrate with other folks, either who you know or who you don't know, to gain a deeper understanding of your program and think of some options for your program. We do have a lunch break built in here. I realized in putting together the agenda, I didn't articulate break time on here, but we'll make sure to have break times carried through here as we transition. So there will be time to get up and stretch and have breaks. So promise that I will do that as well. And then day 2, tomorrow, again, some of the same, although, well, yes, we do have some subpart 1 and subpart 2, and again, with some real work time for you to spend some time on your program plans and come out of this. One of the goals here is to come out of this with a solid updated program plan for your program. The conference materials, and Eric had the link up before. I can probably get back to that. It's the Word document, right, Eric? Right. So let me just, if you haven't gotten this, either the QR code, or it is also linked directly off the South Carolina Department of Education webpage. And is this, yep, this is. That not a hyper? Oh, I was hitting function. There we go. Thank you. So try this one more time here. Little user error there. So this is the web page, if you haven't seen it, that has all of these training materials. It includes the PowerPoints. It also includes this document here, which put together with Anne, and it includes key resources. I just want to spend a moment on this page here of key resources broken up into different areas. So there are resources from the U.S. Department of Education on Title I Part D, including regulations, including statute, regulations, and non-regulatory guidance. We're going to talk about all of those this morning. Then there's the SCDE information, which includes the web page, the handbook, and I believe that everyone got a copy of the handbook on your way in. I think that that's right, isn't it? And that handbook has a wealth of material, and so kudos to the SCDE team for their work in the handbook. There's also a document, allowable use of funds guidance, which was kind of literally just updated because there was some additional guidance that came out. If you're not familiar with NND, Title I Part D has a Technical Assistance National Center, which is referred to as NDTAC, is how that's pronounced, NDTAC, the National Technical Assistance Center for the Education of Neglected or Delinquent Children and Youth, NDTAC, and they have a whole variety of different resources. I advise working through that website. We've picked out some key elements of that. They have a planning toolkit, which is really valuable, and we're going to be using those resources. They're all linked on this site, but if you're not familiar with this, we're going to spend some time over the next 2 days getting familiarity with that site, because they have some great resources there. They also have some other, this toolkit just came out in dated there. It might be even June, but it came out in the last couple of months, so you might not have had a chance to work with it yet, but highly recommend it and highly recommend their work. They are funded by the U.S. Department of Education, so you can count on a pretty high level of quality when working with NDTAC, because they are specifically, while they're not officially part of the U.S. Department of Education, they're funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and so recommend using them. And then they have some other resources which we will work through as we go through the workshop over the next couple of days. So those are the conference materials. And I want to start with a brief, and I promise it will be brief, but I do think that it's important, history of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Now, I will admit I am a former high school history teacher, so I enjoy learning the history for the history portion of it. But more important for your current work is understanding the history as it pertains to the work that you do and what exactly it is that you're doing. I'm going to try something here. I'm going to try to be able to move a little bit so I'm not just stationary here, but pardon me, my eyes go. That one's on. So I guess I'll stay here for a little bit and we'll move from there. All right. So the history of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act was signed into law in April of 1965 by President Lyndon Johnson. I don't know if you've seen this picture before. It's a fairly famous picture of when he signed the bill into law, and he did it in front of his elementary school in rural Texas, and that is his, I think it's his third grade teacher, Miss Loney, who was seated next to him as part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And this is a significant event because it is the first time that the federal government took an active legislative and statutory role in education, because education, per the U.S. Constitution, the 10th Amendment, education is one of those responsibilities designated to the states. We do not have we do have a U.S. Department of Education, but we do not have, education is not a function of the federal government. It is a function of the states' governments. And so prior to 1965, the federal government had no comprehensive role in education because it was one of those rights and responsibilities left to the states. And that is still true today. As a matter of fact, you have various times when politicians talk about removing the role of the federal Department of Education, and that comes up in rhetoric. I don't know if it will happen, and we can talk about that in a moment. But what the federal government, the way that the federal government got put itself into a role in education was providing funding to states. And so basically the way that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act works is states and to some degree school districts have an opportunity to qualify for funding by fulfilling the responsibilities of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So theoretically, any state could say, no, thank you. We do not want to implement that law. And as a result of that, we are not going to take the money for that. That is something that states have the power to do. No state is required to implement the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I will say various states at different points since 1965 and really continuing up to the present day have floated the idea of refusing it. No state has ever done that. So every state participates in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And so one of the, when I say every state also includes the District in Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the Pacific Islands. And so, sometimes there's a challenge that the U.S. Department of Education has struggled with how many states there are, because there's 53 states in the U.S. Department of Education. If you look at their budget, they budget for 53 states because, again, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico and the Pacific Islands are considered state educations. But all of the states have accepted that. Federal funding under ESEA, even as a total, is under 10% of the total budget. So there are some states which at points in history have said, we don't want to participate, but they've also then realized that that would mean in order to keep funding level, they would have to raise state and local taxes by that 8 to 10%. And that's not usually a winning argument for politicians. And so no state has done that. And so, again, it could happen, but it has not happened. And so all states that participate in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and accept the funding, therefore have to carry out the different components of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which includes Title I Part D. Title I Part D was introduced or was included in ESEA in two different parts. Subpart 1, which is about the state agency programs, which in South Carolina, there are 2 state agency programs. That first came into being with the Elementary and Secondary Amendments of 1966. I have to say I'm not as familiar with this history, but after the law was passed, there were some amendments added to the law to kind of clarify some things. And so that's when the first, when Subpart 1 was introduced. And then subpart 2, which is what most of you work for, that did not come into effect until 1994, which is, I'll date myself, I was not working on Title I Part D at the time. It is within my time of being in education. I was teaching in 1994, and so anybody else in the room, I don't know if anybody else in the room, you don't have to raise your hand, you're certainly welcome to, but dating yourselves, I don't know if anybody else was actually part of the original implementation of subpart 2 of the local educational agency program, but that again came into play in 1994. So Title I Part D, and I'm going to be transparent here for a moment. And so anybody else who wondered about this, you don't have to raise your hand, but I will say I always wondered a little bit why it wasn't Title I Parts N and D, because there seems to be a connection there. So the Part D of Title I Part D has nothing to do with delinquent. It's just the order of the law. It's the fourth one. There's Title I Part A, which is general education for support for all students or economically disadvantaged students. Title I Part B, which nobody ever talks about because it's just a section that describes the funding of students. Title I Part C, which is for migratory students, students who are qualified, their families work migratory in the agriculture or fishing industries. And then Title I Part D, which is neglected and delinquent. And so I always wondered why it wasn't Title I Part N and D, but it has nothing to do with that. But there are definitions of the D in delinquent. I'll give you, I don't need to read this to you, but you can see here that delinquent is has to do with adjudication, and so in need of supervision is the part of the Title I Part D delinquent, and then neglected is students who are part of under the state voluntary placed or committed to an institution, and so due to abandonment, neglect, or death of his or her parents or guardians. And so those are the two different parts of Title I Part D, and they are that kind of outlines the law in which students Title I Part D is talking about. Okay, I had said this at the beginning. We talked a little bit about our purpose. It is essential to start with the purpose of Title I Part D, because all of the law, if you think about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, everything that you do, the theory of the law is that everything that you do is designed to fulfill the purpose. The law is written to achieve the purpose. That's what Congress starts with. They write the purpose, and then everything in the law after that is to fulfill the purpose. Now, for Title I Part D, there's actually, especially if you're subpart 2, there's 3 different parts of purpose that intersect with each other, because Title I has a purpose. It's actually the first sentence of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and I think it's actually, if I have a favorite purpose, but it's a clear statement of what this law is about, and so I appreciate that. Title I Part D as a part has a purpose, and then Title I Part D subpart 2 has a purpose. And as you go down, you need to be thinking about all of those purposes when you are enacting programming and spending money. It is this carrying out the purpose of the law? So that is why we're going to spend some time this morning on the purpose of Title I Part D. And it starts with the purpose of Title I, which, like I said, is right. This is the first sentence of text in the law. The purpose of this title is to provide all children significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. That is the purpose of Title I, and it says all children. You can think of this in your head as it relates to Title I Part D, going back again to our definitions from this, that you can read into that. The purpose of this title is to provide neglected children and delinquent children significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. Then Title I, Part D has a purpose as well. And it is ESEA section 1401A, and these are the purposes of Title I, Part D. So anybody who'd be willing to read out the number one here on the Title I purpose? Thank you.
To improve educational services for children and youth in local, tribal, and state institutions for neglected or delinquent children and youth, so that such children and youth have the opportunity to meet the same challenging state academic standards that all children in the state are expected to meet.
Thank you very much. And you can see, hopefully you can see there a connection with the purpose of Title I, Part A. Somebody willing to read Part 2? Thank you very much. And we're going to spend some significant time on transition because it's an essential part of Title I, Part D, and is right there in the purpose. And then number 3.
Education and the involvement of their families and communities.
Thank you very much. And so you see families and community, and we're going to talk about that as well in there. And thank you all very much for volunteering in that. So this is the purpose of Title I, Part D. Like, we're going to cover the subpart 2 purpose in the next session, the breakout session just for subpart 2. But so I want to have we're going to take sorry, I thought I had a timer here, but I think in the transition edit, that's fine. So wanted to have a little bit of a table discussion here in thinking about the purpose of Title I, Part D. What resonates with you, and do you see any misalignment with your program in the purpose? And I'm going to have you have a chance to think individually for about 2 minutes, and then pair up and talk to somebody for about 3 minutes, and then have a table discussion for 5 minutes. So we're going to take about 10 minutes to do this. And actually, if you want to see the purposes of Title I, Part D, there is a document. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had them on one document. I guess it's in the PowerPoint. I thought I created a document with the purpose of Title I, Part D, but I did not put it on the, I didn't put it on here, so my apologies. So you can look at the 2 different slides for the purposes and then see. So again, the questions are, what resonates with you, and do you see any misalignment with your program? We're going to take about 10 minutes. Just this. Yeah, it's not. Do you want me to? It's not big, so just switch it.
Should we transition to your peer talk, so you can talk to Elbow Parker, or is there free table to do that? Sorry. And then the other part that come out.
So after this presentation,
That'll be more like 3 Mondays. This.
so she said we were, but I just figured that out. So it's been just.
Yeah, I thought it said for the support issue. Yeah. Take a couple more minutes. Is that the one?
It's something that needs to be shared. I'll share. I'm working that as signal.
Actually, I might actually
think it's just. Hold it down for a minute.
All right, nice discussion there. And I think I got my, thanks to Eric, got the microphone working, so I can wander a little bit. Anyone want to share anything, in terms of either misalignment or pieces that resonate? Use the microphone, just, there we go. No, what happened?
And we kind of talked about it here, the programs program that I have in my district, it's so, kids are in and out, in and out, in and out. I mean, sometimes monthly. And it's very hard to have something, but to measure anything that we're doing because we don't have the same kids. It's just not the easiest facility to work with.
Yeah, that's, and it's not a I mean, I'm gonna put words into your mouth, but in my interpretation, so my apologies. It's not necessarily misaligned with the purpose can still be there, but how you actually carry that out. I'm a deep believer that the core, the root of education is relationships and building relationships with students and families. And like you said, if you're turning those over every 4 to 6 weeks, how do you build authentic relations? I didn't share this. One of the things that was fairly valuable to me as a teacher, I taught elementary school and then high school. And so I had some students who I taught in 3rd grade, who I had again in 11th and 12th grade. And like having relationships for now 8, 9, 10 years with students is incredibly rewarding. And, you really get to know students deeply. And to try to do that in 4 to 6 weeks is just, there seems a significant disconnect there. So not a misalignment with the purpose, but a misalignment with the full, with carrying out the program. Absolutely. It's a really good point. And it's one of, I don't know, how many of you, can I ask this? How many of you also administer Title I Part C, which is migratory education? A few hands up there. There's some parallels there in that migratory students by definition are moving a lot. And so now some of them come back to the same places repeatedly, but it's a challenge there that you learn from, in that when students are constantly moving, it's very hard to develop those relationships. It's a really good point. Thank you so much. Anything else with comments or questions or things that resonate or misalignment?
In students' lives and participate in education. But oftentimes the parents are not in the lives of the children. So there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And there's plenty of research that shows how valuable parents, how important parents are to the lives of the children, but due to a whole host of different circumstances when the parents are not involved. Yeah, and again, I don't necessarily know if that's a misalignment with the purpose or intent, but it doesn't always play out in a way. And so I think that that's a challenge in the ND program. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
Sometimes hard to find other things, especially if they attend a Title I school and already have all these activities and plans to provide that additional. I think that's one of the things that we have a problem with. It's not the misalignment, it is the alignment of the programs. But there's only so much transitional services that one child can take. There's only so much, after school tutoring or intervention that a child can have. And so it's great that we have all these resources, but sometimes the alignment with Title I, going to a Title I school, along with sites that already have other programs coming in, I feel as though sometimes the alignment with Title I and Title I Part D, because they kind of have the same, provide the same thing, makes it very difficult sometimes to spend this money for the purpose that it is for.
Yeah, that's also a really good point. As we get into the program things, and those should be aligned. And if there are, if the needed what is most important in these programs is serving the students' needs. And so if you're serving the students' needs with Title I Part A funds, because that's the school that the student goes to, then it doesn't necessarily have, like you said, there's a limit to, there's even just how many hours are after school. And so a kid, if they're already in a program, and so you can, those funding, if it's allowable under Title I Part A, it might also be allowable under Title I Part B. And so you might then be able to pay for it with Title I Part B and free up some of your Title I Part A funds for a different program that might even serve other students. As long as those Title I Part B students are getting the services that they need, you might be able to have some flexibility in there. We can certainly talk about that as we get into the program specific. That's a really good point. Yes, please.
I've noticed that some of the allowable activities are geared, or a lot of them are geared to like the secondary students. Whereas in our case, in our district, only like 10% of the ND students are secondary and the majority are elementary. So it's also just a limitation of the allowability because of the population it serves.
That's a really good point. I think you're right. When you look at the list, yeah, you can definitely see that. I think sometimes in our head, we think about ND students as being secondary students and not as much geared towards the younger age, but that's a really good point. With allowable costs, and this is something, one of the reasons that I think it's essential to start to purpose is that activities that fulfill the purpose of Title I Part D or Title I Part A are allowable activities, and therefore costs associated with them are allowable. So those allowable cost lists are essential and they're really important, but they might not speak to every circumstance. And so, it's something that I say, if you can show explicitly how an activity meets one of these things, then you can make the case to your SCBE friends as to why it would, why it would be allowable, as long as it doesn't break any other allowable cost rules. So we're going to talk about some of those as we go through it. Like there's some things in that, like amusement parks is really questionable. I'm just giving out something. Can't buy lottery tickets. Gambling is not allowable. Alcohol, those are the obvious ones. But you can make case. Those allowable lists these are ideas of allowable costs, but they might not speak to every circumstance. And so over the next 2 days, we have some time to spend to look at those and brainstorm some of those activities. Built-in variety of different times for questions and discussions. So we'll have more, but let me give one more moment, or we're going to kind of continue on with this overview here. Because the other portion that's not built into federal, well, it is built into federal law. And here's another interesting intersection, and where Congress said, okay, this is what the federal law says, but then they said you have to implement the federal law, but then they said one of the parts of the federal law is each state in order to qualify for the money, must write a state plan. And that state plan gets approved by the U.S. Department of Education, and in some ways becomes not a part of the federal law, but your state needs to carry out its state plan purposes, again, as a condition of accepting the money, and therefore all LEAs in the state need to carry out the purposes of the state plan to meet, to qualify for the money. So you have to look at the purpose of the law, and then also in here, what are the parts of the state plan? And I do have this linked in the PowerPoint. It is, oh gosh, I forgot to look. It's roughly 200 pages long. I don't know how many of the folks at the SCDE table were a part of writing that state plan, but I was a part of it in my state. It was a pretty significant amount of work when we wrote the ESSA state plan. Also included a lot of stakeholder engagement. So some of you folks may have, if you think back into your memory, you're like, oh yeah, I remember going to a session and I got, I provided some input, or my superintendent, school board, whoever was a part of that. But Title I Part D, there's an explicit section of the ESSA state plan for every state that requires some questions, and in South Carolina, it's on page 112 of the state plan. And they had to have specific goals here. The U.S. Department of Education asked about the goals to ensure, and so South Carolina's goals are to ensure opportunities that improve and increase the academic, vocational, and technical skills of children and youth identified as neglected, delinquent, or at risk, so they will become lifelong learners and productive members of society. And then goal 2 is about assessing the effectiveness. So the evaluation component, which I think everybody in here is familiar with, is it really an essential part of Title I Part B, is the evaluation component of it. And so again, goal number 1, and goal number 1 has some objectives, and these are specific measures of how South Carolina will fulfill goal number 1. And you can see that it's about making increases annually. So each year, by 1%, I will say, and I was clearly not a part of South Carolina, but there was a very significant challenge nationally with states who had to come up with both aggressive goals but achievable goals. And states went around and around and around, both the U.S. Department of Education and even internally over this, of we want to have ambitious goals, but we also don't want to have goals that are so ambitious that no one's ever going to reach those goals. So this ambitious yet achievable goals was a real challenge that came about. And so you can see here, increasing annually by at least 1%. That's in all 4 of the objectives here. Course credits that meet state requirements for grade promotion, secondary school graduation, and GED. So 1% closer to promotion and graduation, 1% to make a successful transition to your regular education program. The importance of transition, we're going to spend a significant amount of time talking about that. Completing secondary school or equivalency, 1% increase in graduation rates. And again, if this is every year, 1% better every year, then we're going to compile that and get better as we move on. And then also 1% better every year of participating in post-secondary education. So all of these combined are the objectives that will help meet goal number 1. And again, goal number 1 is ensuring, improving, and increasing the academic, vocational, and technical skills. So those are the parts of goal number 1 of the South Carolina State Plan. Goal number 2 is about the evaluation, assessing the effectiveness of the plan. And you can see here that it is how this plan will be evaluated in terms of number of students, accruing credits, and so forth. I don't need to read it all to you, but using these assessments and why those assessments are important. So you see this here. It's an important part of the South Carolina plan.
As a part of this last one, let me say that, evaluations are required, and this is in the law. N&D programs must be evaluated at least once every 3 years. They can be more often. Some states do them annually. Some of the larger programs do them annually. But if you're wondering why do we have to be evaluated? Let's move in there. Sorry about that. If you're wondering why the program has to be evaluated at least once every 3 years, that's actually required by the statute. Congress, when they wrote the law, said evaluations must be at least once every 3 years. They can be more often. Sometimes states, if you're in a larger LEA, you might get it more often than once every 3 years. We did that in my state with larger, just because of the amounts of funding and the amounts of students who were served. So we did that. So it's an important thing to think about with program evaluation. All right, just shared some information there on South Carolina state plan. So another pause for questions on that or discussion, or anybody have anything, go back and I can put these back up on the screen. That's not what I want. All right, and I think actually I'm right about on time here. Yeah, right about on time for our first activity. And so we're gonna actually, I'm gonna introduce this, but then actually the bulk of us, subpart 2 is gonna stay here. We're gonna take a 5-minute break and then come back here. So I'm gonna introduce this, yeah, I will introduce this. So the needs assessment activity, which I'll kind of preview it for subpart 2, you're gonna do it. The first part of the application is to complete a needs assessment. And so we have a tool, NDTAC has a needs assessment tool, which you can use to begin to do this. But actually what we're gonna do is, it's just subpart 1 that is gonna do the needs assessment. So I might give some individual instruction here. Let's do this. Yep, we're gonna take a 5-minute break. And then there's restrooms that are right outside to the right there. There's some water over in the back as well. And then subpart 2, we're gonna come back and do some specific subpart 2 activities here. And then at 11 o'clock, we'll swap between subpart 1 and subpart 2. So let's take a 5-minute break and come back. Yeah.
Yes. Oh. Same here.
All right, we'll get started in 1 minute.
Yeah.
And I think most of us are back, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Like I said, subpart 2 is the majority, I'm sure you know, the majority of the folks here at the local education agency programs. So this might help me more than you, at kind of getting a sense of, I know South Carolina a little bit, not very much, so just kind of getting a sense of the size of your programs, of how many youth you serve, and like was brought up in the comments before, I know that these numbers, you know, we have transition and students coming in and out, but you kind of look at any point in time, how many youth you serve. Do you have any, like, trying to get the sense, small programs under 25 students on a regular, like an average basis? Yeah, for N&D, just for N&D, yeah. 25, how about in that 25 to 50 range? Okay, some there, 50 to 75, getting a little bit more like 75 to 100. Some in there, and then 100 to 200. Or anybody over two? Do we have over 200? Larger districts? Okay, so kind of, you can see, one of the challenges, and actually, I didn't say this before, one of the challenges with ESEA is that, well, challenges and benefits. So ESEA is a federal law, so all states have the opportunity to participate. As I said, all states participate, and also all LEAs. That's not all LEA, actually, all LEAs do have the opportunity to participate in programs like Title II, not necessarily Title I Part A, because they might not qualify, they might not have enough low-income students. But there are a handful, and I don't know if you have any in South Carolina, I haven't spoken about this. LEAs also have the opportunity to not participate. And in Wisconsin, we had a few LEAs whose allocations were so small that they qualified, but literally they would qualify for $6,000. And then they looked at the list of responsibilities that came with that $6,000 and they said, no, thank you, keep the money. And that is their right. It was our job to make them informed that they could make an informed decision, but I totally understood that for $6,000, I might do the same. I will say, we had a district that turned down $300,000 of ESSER funds because they didn't like the requirements. That one surprised me. Let's see some faces. That one surprised me a little bit. I'm not sure quite how they sold it to their local community, that this was $300,000. This is a small district. I don't know, their operating budget was only a couple $1 million. To turn down that much money was surprising to me, but that is a local decision that they were allowed to make. And so they went ahead and did that and returned the money and we redistributed it. So that's what they want to do. But so for those of you who raised your hand, under 25 students or over 200 students, the requirements are the same. That's the way the federal law works. It also gives me the opportunity. So although I'm not based in South Carolina, one of the things about this is a federal program, so every state has to implement it the same way. Now, as I showed in the last slide, every state has their own plan, but the general parameters of the rules are the same. So if you were to go and implement an NED program in North Carolina or Georgia, going across one of the borders, the same rules would apply here. And so regardless of how large you are, how small you are, those same rules apply. Purpose, yes. Sorry, I forgot where it was. I thought we were in a different one. Subpart D, I said this at the beginning. Title I Part D, Subpart 2 has another purpose, and Congress does not always do this, but they wrote purposes for Title I as a whole, which includes all of the parts of Title I. They wrote a specific purpose for Title I Part D, and then they wrote another purpose for Title I Part D, Subpart 2, which is in ESEA Section 1421. And here you can see that it says that the introduction, the purpose of this subpart is to support the operation of local educational agency programs that involve collaboration with locally operated correctional facilities. And could I have a volunteer? Anybody willing to read number 1?
To carry out high quality education programs to prepare children for secondary school training employment.
Thank you. Number 2.
To provide activities to facilitate the transition of such children and youth from the correctional program to further education or employment.
Thank you. And number 3.
To operate programs in local schools, including schools operated or funded by the Bureau of Indian Education for children and youth returning from correctional facilities and programs which may serve at-risk children and youth.
Thank you very much. And so I think you can see that these are, well, there's certainly, I mean, the purpose is, I don't know that Congress, I don't know the Congress or the staff that helped write this sat down and put these in alignment, but you can, I hope, see connections between these and not necessarily contradiction, but they wanted to be a little bit more clear about what subpart 2 and local educational agency programs were responsible for when it came together here. So when you consider now subpart 2, we talked about Title I Part D in the first session, Title I Part D as a whole. When we think of Title I Part D subpart 2, you now have to consider the purpose of Title I, the purpose of Title I Part D, and the purpose of Title I Part D subpart 2 as a whole to think about what it is that you're carrying out and what responsibilities you have. And so I want to give a little bit of time now, again, for some table talk to think about putting together this subpart purpose with the other parts and how do they fit together to define the purpose of this subpart, and what questions, ideas, thoughts do you have? Anything on that? And again, we're going to use we're going to have some individual time, some pairing time, and some table time. So we'll take a total of about 10 minutes to explore this question. And you do have links to all of these slides. I don't have one slide with all the purposes. The font would be about 8 points. I don't think anybody could read it. So, but if you look back, you can get all 3 of those put together. And I will put together a one-pager that has all of the purposes on it. I thought I had that, but I don't think that I sent it. So we're going to take 10 minutes. Thanks to Eric. These are all of the statements of purpose on one screen. Again, the font's a little bit small, but this has them all on one screen if you want to see them. I'll make sure to share this too. Thanks, Eric. If you haven't done so yet, you can move into pair talking or larger group talk sharing. Just And just to clarify, it is on the website. I was thinking where it was. It's Title I Part D purpose, so it is linked on the website. So you do have access to this it's live on the web right here in the training website, Title I Part D purpose, the next to last. I was looking in key resources and I couldn't see it there because Ann had put it up and Eric had put it up. So there is Title I Part D purpose. So you do see that there. So you do have access to this document that has it all in one place if you want to print that out. And so it might serve as a good resource for you. Take a couple more minutes. All right, take just another 30 seconds or so to finish up the conversation. All right, and does anybody have anything that they want to share out in terms of pieces that fit together? Or if there's any questions, ideas, thoughts, or I didn't put it up here, but any misalignment? I was struck again, thinking of the comment earlier, we're looking at number one, carrying out high quality education programs to prepare children and youth for secondary school completion. Again, and I know that, you know, even elementary school, middle school students to prepare them, but it still seems like a disconnect with the idea of supporting younger students, and it seems written for secondary students. Not exclusively, but a little bit in emphasis on secondary students. And I know if you look writ large, the bulk of the students are going to be secondary students, but that's not necessarily true in every program. Anybody else have any questions, ideas, thoughts? Anything they wanted to share? Okay, so in thinking about implementing a federal program, there are three different components that go together. We started with purpose, which is written in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That is called statute or law, and it is, you know, law is something that you must follow, and you have to, if you're not following it, then there are potentially implications and consequences for that. The federal government also and state governments have the power to write regulations. Regulations, while not passed by the legislative body, hold the force and effect of law, and therefore you must follow regulations just as you follow the law. And so when implementing a federal program, you know, the first two places that you should look as an administrator, and it's often at the state administration level and then down to the LEA level, is what does the law say and what do the regulations say? And so Title I, not all federal programs have regulations associated with them, but some of them do, although I guess all do in the sense that there are some fiscal regulations, and we'll talk about those tomorrow. Like, for example, I guess previewing this, but in the fiscal regulations, when we say things like you can't spend federal funds on alcohol or gambling, that's actually not written in the law. It is in the regulations explicitly like that. It says that you can't do that. And if you do it, you're violating regulations. But violation of regulation, because they have the power and effect of law, it's the same consequences as if you were violating the law. So regulations are important. And then I give that a whole big spiel about how regulations are important. The regulations for Title I Part D, Subpart 2 are fairly meager. There's not much there. It does include, it really just has a definition, and it's in 34 CFR 200.90. It will never be a quiz on, I will never give you a quiz on that, but that means CFR means Code of Federal Regulations. So if you ever see that, it means that that is something that has the power of law. And it gives a definition of what a locally operated correctional facility is. And that means a facility in which persons are confined as a result of conviction for a criminal offense, including persons under 21 years of age. The term also includes a local, public, or private institution and community day program or school not operated by the state that serves delinquent children and youth. And so that part is definition. I actually gave definitions of neglected and delinquent earlier. Those came from NDTAC. Those are not regulatory, but they are what the definitions, and those are good uses. This definition of a locally operated correctional facility is something that is in regulations. And so this is something that essentially has the weight of law. And so just wanted to point it out and bring it to your attention. I don't know if there's any questions about that or comments about that. Fairly straightforward. Sorry. Jumped ahead here. Apologies. They hit the wrong. Okay, so talked about statute and regulations. In implementation, the third component of implementation of a federal regulation, of a federal program, is looking to non-regulatory guidance. And the U.S. Department of Education produces non-regulatory guidance on many to most of their programs. These often come out in forms of Q&As, question and answers. They're usually titled non-regulatory guidance documents. These are very helpful because they provide insight and they try to, the department, said that they collect questions from the field, and then when they see the same question over and over and over again, they then come up with a response to it and publish that response. Now, there is something that's important here. Guidance is not law. So state officials and federal officials rely on that guidance, and they will tell you the guidance says this. I used to say this all of the time. Now, if an LEA or a state can show how the guidance how the law does not support the guidance, the law or the regulations can take priority, not the guidance. So guidance doesn't mean that you're automatically guidance is not law. It also means if you are in violation of guidance, you are not in violation of the law. So they're not the same levels of consequence. However, the guidance does tell you what the U.S. Department of Education or the State Department of Education are thinking about a topic, what their thoughts are. And so if you're going to say, yeah, we're not going to follow that guidance, you better be pretty sure of what you're doing. You better be pretty sure that you're right. And so while it is not law, highly, highly, highly recommend that you follow it unless you come up with some reason why you think that the federal government is off. It tends to be guidance, and guidance tends to be much more easily understood. It's written often, like I said, in a Q&A format. And so if you're looking for something, it can often be a lot more easy to understand than trying to comb through statute or regulations to find something. Combing through statute or regulations is something you can push off on your friends from the South Carolina Department of Education. They can go through the statute. But the non-regulatory guidance can often say, hey, I was wondering about this. And if you search for it, you might see some easy answers. And so I do think that it's important in a training session to cover some of the primary topics that they talk about. So I have some, I went through the non-regulatory guidance, and you have links to the non-regulatory guidance. You may be familiar with this. Actually, I'm curious, just from a show of hands, how many people in the room, as you've kind of gone through your job, have looked at this non-regulatory guidance to use to answer questions? All right, some folks, not so many. And this guidance is from 2020, so a couple of years old now. And I believe that the 2020 guidance was updated guidance. They had previous guidance that they had updated in 2020. Feels like I need to pull it up. I don't have it up on the screen right now. I thought it was, I think maybe there were minor updates. I thought it was older than that. I'm seeing a face here that I think it is older than that. That it was originally out, because even in the transition of law, some of the guidance still stays the same. I'm still using some guidance documents for some programs all the way back to like 2006. And so some of the guidance is like that. All right, so how does the LEA determine the eligibility of children and youth to receive services under Subpart 2? And so this is an important question that you might have, is who is eligible to receive services? I want to give you a moment to read through this and see, are there any questions there? All children and youth in local correctional facilities are eligible to be served through the age of 21. And so that's important there. And then in local participating schools, all youth who are eligible for services under Title I, Part A or C are eligible if the school receives Title I funds. And if it's not a Title I, Part A school, the LEA may identify at-risk youth enrolled in the school for Part D services by these categories. And this is important because many school districts, high schools, and I know we talked some about elementary schools, but many districts, high schools are not Title I Part A schools, and yet children and youth who are in any of those categories at the bottom are eligible for Title I Part D funds, even if they are not in a Title I Part A school. Take a moment here, I'm seeing some head nods, but any questions or any comments about this one, about who is eligible for services, which students? Jennifer, okay, sorry.
I'm saying game.
Yes, and based on definitions established by the SEA or LEA, so that gives the LEA, if that was a specific concern in your LEA, you could come up with a definition and then provide some programming, mentoring, guidance, to support those students. So that is an interesting one. Pregnant and parenting youth. So, one of the questions is, could we have programs to support those students? That's something. Yep.
We received an application for. What you're saying is that at a school, those funds and funding for a site can be used?
I'm gonna get, great question, and there's another non-regulatory guidance question about that one. I believe it just coming up in a minute, so just give me a moment for that. I'm pretty sure that's up in one of mine, I don't have them in front of me, but give me 1 second for that one. Second question, at the LEA level, should they be targeted to, or should they be targeted as a need? And actually, I actually think this one's written a little, I think the answer to this is a little bit confusing, because it's about this question of documenting that those children have the greatest need, which I actually think for best practices, you should document, but that if you only have limited funds, you want to target those funds to the students with the greatest need. So you might have more need than you have funds. And schools have to do this all of the time. What are kind of the most needs that you have? And then do those needs. And so, or meet those needs. And so once you do that, you want to make sure that you then serve those students. Again, this answer says you are not required to document those needs, but I think it is best practice to document as for, guidance is of law. So I think what happened here in the guidance is they didn't want to tell you that you had to document because the law doesn't require it, but I still think it's best practice to say, why are you doing that? And actually the activity that we're going to do after this is a needs assessment, and it'll kind of give you some, start you down that path. Yes.
Resident of one of the institutions is above 18, under 21, but does not actually attend school. Are they eligible for services?
Well, that is a great question. One of the things I think at the state level, sometimes you have to do more research. I believe the definition, that might even be a different thing, is under the age of 21 who have not yet graduated from high school. So I believe that once they've graduated from high school, I'm seeing some head nods. So I believe that once they've graduated from high school, then therefore they are not eligible for services. But if they are so if they're between the ages of 18 and 21 and not yet graduated, then they would be eligible for services. I think that that's right. I might need to kind of verify myself and look that up in terms of the definition, but I think that that's the way that it's defined.
They have to be.
Yes, I think with subpart 1, it can depend a little bit if they're in a correctional institution or not, but if they are, I guess in school, if they're receiving educational services towards their high school diploma, they're still eligible, which I don't quite know how you do that without being enrolled in a school, so I think the answer to your question is yes. And because there's a question, and I can't remember if it's in subpart 1 or subpart 2, where this gets a little bit confusing. If they've received a GED, but they're still taking high school courses, you can serve them with subpart 2 funds. Now, or you can serve them with Title I Part D funds. And again, I can't remember if it's subpart 1 or subpart 2. We'll see in a second here which question it is. But we're now talking about probably a tiny fraction of students, because most students, once they receive their GED, are taking community college classes, or, they're taking post-secondary classes, which wouldn't be Title I Part D, but if they received a GED, but they're still taking high school classes, you can use the funds for it. Again, that's a small segment of the population. Now, this is non-regulatory guidance, and they do this occasionally, but this question of, may LEAs provide services to delinquent children in community day programs under subpart 2? And the answer is yes. And even though this is non-regulatory guidance, it refers you back to the regulations that we just said of 34 CFR 200.91C, defining the locally operated correctional facility to include a local public or private institution, a community day program or school not operated by the state that serves delinquent children and youth. So if you're in community day programs, they are eligible under subpart 2 to be served. I think we're still getting to that question yet. Oh, this is actually a little bit different. I hope this isn't the one that I was thinking of from your question before, but how many of you, I asked before about Title I Part C, how many of you also are the Title I Part A coordinator in your district? All right, I'm seeing a number of hands up, and maybe in the large districts that's not true. This is important that in addition to subpart 2 funds, so this is not anything in addition, this is not, this doesn't take away from the subpart 2 funds, but Title I Part D, neglected and delinquent students are categorically eligible for Title I Part A. So you can serve these students with Title I Part A funds just as you can serve them with Title I Part D funds. I think a lot of people know this, but you're allowed to take, and you're allowed to take a reservation. And the reason for the reservation is because you're allowed to serve them in non-Title I schools, which is what we talked about before. And so the question, well, how do we get the money to serve students in non-Title I schools? You take it as a reservation, and then you give it, and it sometimes can present some questions. I was at the state level, and sometimes, I don't know if anybody's ever been in a situation where you have to explain to an auditor, because an auditor will see so-and-so high school is not a Title I school, and yet you have $20,000 of federal Title I funds going to a high school that's not a Title I Part A school. How do you do that? You're allowed to take reservations for, and indeed, you're also, it's the same process as taking reservations to serve students experiencing homelessness. And I don't know how many of you are also McKinney-Vento coordinators in your district, but if you're the McKinney-Vento coordinator, you can also take a reservation. And at the high school level, that's something that people do to serve students experiencing homelessness. And there's a lot of programs, from anything from bus passes and after school activities fees and things like that. Even medical expenses for students experiencing homelessness, and you might know that. So you can do the same type of reservation of funds. Now, one of the challenges is there's not additional funds that you get from Title I Part A to serve Title I Part D students. And so there's always, it kind of goes back to that question of priority of needs and how you manage that. And it's definitely a challenge there. Although, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but one of the pieces of a Title I Part A allocation for a local educational agency is how many neglected and delinquent students reside in that district. So you are getting some funds from the federal government to serve those students. It all comes in one big amount of money, so you don't really see that. I guess theoretically you might be able to figure it out, although it's incredibly complicated how you do it. But it is one of the data points that the Department of Education uses when determining your Title I Part A allocation. And so it's included in there to serve your Title I Part D students. Any questions on that one? I didn't see that question yet. I'm still looking for it. All right, so there's a section here in question 01 on the requirements of subpart 2 funds, and it's kind of a long series of questions, it's a long answer to this. This goes, and this is embedded in that use of funds guidance. It doesn't, the non-regulatory guidance does not give, U.S. Department of Education non-regulatory guidance doesn't give you a list of things that you can use, but it does say, what are the requirements of this? And some of these you can see, hopefully these are familiar because these are the same as the purpose of the fund. So basically here the non-regulatory guidance is saying you need to carry out the purpose of the funds. It also talks about formal agreements, and we have a different session. I think it's tomorrow on formal, it might be this, I can't remember this afternoon or tomorrow, we're gonna talk about formal agreements and the role of formal agreements in subpart 2. But you can also see here some other subpart 2 funds as appropriate. And so this as appropriate is giving discretion to the LEA to say, what are your local needs? What do you need most? And so here's where you have dropout prevention programs. You have services that support students who are pregnant or parents, coordination of health and social service. I don't know, Jennifer, if they have, I can't remember if they have gang here, but this would be the same thing, where that would not necessarily be important to all school districts, but some of the school districts to talk about that and to where there is need, or if there's a need in your local community for services supporting students who are gang members. Mentoring and peer mediation. So again, this is all as appropriate. So these are not required services, but based on your local needs assessment, we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. And that's the next activity that we're going to do, is the local needs assessment. This one, I put this section in here. I'm going to give folks a minute to read this one because it's kind of confusing, and I feel like they must have gotten a specific question here that this was in response to. Anybody want to, actually, can I have somebody read it out loud? It might help with processing this one because of the however clause in there. Anyone want to read that one?
Prevention programs for students returning from a locally operated correctional facility. However, an LEA that serves a school operated by a locally operated correctional facility in which more than 30% of the children and youth attending the school will reside outside of the boundaries served by the LEA upon leaving the facility. It is not required to operate a dropout prevention program within the school and may use all of its subpart 2 funds for programs in locally operated correctional facilities, provided that those facilities have a formal agreement with them.
And I think this is to address that question of if students are attending a locally operated correctional facility, but they are going to go back to a different community than for the dropout prevention. And some of you have this, we have this in our state where certain students, they gather in one place where the correctional facility is, but they're not gonna return, they're gonna return to a different school district, a different LEA. And so therefore you're not required to do the same type of services. You're not prevented from doing those services, but I think the guidance here is saying that that would not be the response. That would be more the responsibility of the home district rather than where that's being operated. So this one's always a little bit confusing to me. Some of these guidance I have to read multiple times to make sure I'm actually understanding what it means, but that is here. All right, just looking at the guidance here, any noticings or wonderings or any alignment or misalignment? We've had a few questions as we've gone through here, but want to give a chance if you have any specific questions that came up from any of these. And that goes to the question before about serving students in subpart 2. I want to look, because I didn't see it in here in my question. I'm going to come back to that one because I need to take a look section and look at that, because I think that well, I want to make sure that I'm looking at it correctly before I respond to that one. By the way, which is something that I recommend, just when you get the questions, trying to find, I always, when I respond to a question, want to be able to cite it with regulations, guidance, or statute. And so I can't get it on the top of my head, but I promise that I will come back to that one. I'll look that one up, because I think that you're allowed to serve those students even if they're not specifically at those facilities, but I want to make sure that I can cite something for you, that you have it in, that I can cite something for you. Goes to the specific facility, which seems like there's some tension there in that. Right, so that's what I want to make sure that I give the documented answer on that. It's a really good point. And that is some misalignment that's worth discussing. All right. So I actually want to, we're going to go on in just a little bit. We'll have got 2 microphones going, I think. Turn this one off. I'm going to stand here for a moment. Is that better? I think that's better. All right, so under the deck up here. Great. Yep, there it is. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. All right, so in the linked in the PowerPoint, and it's also actually on that slide, is an NDTech tool. It's tool number 3, conducting a needs assessment. And you're going to get about an hour before lunch to go through this document and begin. I don't know that you can actually do the complete needs assessment, because you probably need to gather a team and do some work. But this is I think a helpful tool, and will really, this is a helpful tool and will kind of guide you along the lines of what it is to do. So as you go through, you can see that it has different components of it, some questions here that will help you determine what are the needs in your local facility. There's a Word document, so you can actually write into it. You can begin gathering your team and doing your planning. It leads you through here. So what entities are requesting and guiding the needs assessment, what's the purpose and scope, and so forth. Establishing, this is it, your needs assessment planning team. So many of you are here, virtually all of you are here individually. So again, you might not be able to do this now, but you can spend some time brainstorming. Who do I need to connect with for my team, and who do I need to work with? And go through. You can develop questions and summarize the data. You might be able to pull some data on what data am I going to use for my needs assessment. So that's something you can do. So this is going to be some activity time for you to work through this document. I'm going to be working both with subpart 1. I'll have some time to also float around here, and we will spend some time on the needs assessment. So you're going to have about an hour to work on this needs assessment before we come back and then break for lunch. And you're going to stay in here to work on the needs assessment. So that's going to be our next activity. Let me see if there's any questions. I'm also going to take a moment and look for that question about the facilities and look in my documents. But any questions or comments about this next activity for the rest of the morning? And the last thing that I'll leave you with is, you may be doing this individually and working individually. You also have the opportunity, because there's colleagues here from other facilities that are sitting at tables with you. And so you might want to connect with other folks and other colleagues to see, to get more information or bounce ideas, or should this person be a part of it? Should that person be a part of it? And so feel free, please, to make those connections and to help each other out as you go through here. All right, so we're going to take about an hour to work on this, and I'll be back right before lunch. Thank you. Yeah, we can start. Should be good for about 2 hours.